Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Knitted by Whitney podcast. This is my first podcast of 2022 and I'm starting off with something small. I put out a message on my Instagram asking people if they would be interested in seeing podcast episodes about accessories or if they were just interested in seeing my reviews of garments. And pretty much everybody said that they would also be interested in watching podcast episodes about accessories. So today I have a short little video for you about my latest knitted accessory. If you see my Instagram, you'll know that this is the School Run Headband by Penrose Knits, which I will get into very shortly. But first, the mug of the episode. I am using a mug today that I've had for quite a few years. My best friend gave this to me, I think the first year that we were friends. It was our first year exchanging Christmas gifts, or I should say holiday gifts, because she celebrates Christmas and Hanukkah. So this was her first gift to me, and I absolutely love it. It's one of those mugs that when you pour hot water in it, it changes. So it's a banned book mug, so it has all kinds of titles with some of the words blacked out. And when you pour hot water into it, some of those words disappear, those blocks disappear. And you get to read the titles of these banned books. But I just have cold water in it, so unfortunately none of the titles are visible. But I'm feeling quite warm inside in this sweater. So I didn't think that I could handle a hot beverage on top of that. Cheers. So you may notice I have a slightly different setup right now, and that is because my fiance and I recently changed up our living room, and I'm trying out what it would be like to record my podcast against this wall rather than against the window that I usually show you. So let's see how it goes. I'm liking it. I like that it's a little plainer than the window in the background. But unfortunately that means that you won't get to see whatever the weather is. Currently it is very, very cold, but it is bright blue sky, lots of sun. So it's one of those really deceiving days where you think, oh, it looks so nice out, I really want to get outside. And then you get outside and you realize that was a bad idea. It's really, really cold. I gotta go back inside. It's definitely one of those days. So getting into my first accessory review. Well, technically it's not, because I did talk about accessories in my third episode, which was Boyfriend Knits, which was all things that I knit for my fiance, who was at the time my boyfriend. So I did review a couple accessories there. If you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description below. But this is my first time reviewing an accessory all by itself in a video. And one of the reasons that I thought I would do that is because I've made myself a goal for 2022 to release 10 podcast episodes, which it's a lot for me because I only just started this podcast halfway through 2021. And as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I'm a monogamous knitter. So that means I can't do an episode until I finish an item, and I only knit one item at a time. So I think it's doable that I can do 10 items in a year. I have done more than that, but will I do 10 different items that are all things I haven't previously discussed on the podcast? That's going to be my challenge. So I'm off to a good start. I've got my first accessory, and I am about halfway through, maybe a little more than halfway through, knitting my next item, which I'm going to talk about in my next episode. If you see my Instagram, you know what it is. If not, take a look over there. I'll leave that linked below. But yeah, I thought I shouldn't just do podcast episodes only about garments, because accessories can be size inclusive too. Case in point, this lovely headband, which I'm going to take off now because I'm quite warm. Fix the hair a bit. This is the School Run Headband by Laura of Penrose Knits. Laura also has a knitting podcast here on YouTube called The Knitting Pickle Podcast. I will link her down below. She's one of my favorite knitting podcasters to watch. She's really, really good. She also just did a really intense Vlogmas schedule this past Christmas. So it was such a treat to get to watch Laura almost every day because she's just such a fun person to watch. She very much makes you feel like you're part of her family when you're watching her videos because you're in her home and you're in her life a lot, and it's just really, really fun. I really enjoy it. Also, she is a great knitter and she is a budding knitwear designer. So Laura has started off with just a few patterns. Her first two patterns were both socks, and I'm not a sock knitter, as you know, but she recently released just before Christmas an accessory set, which she called the School Run Collection, and it consisted of a hat, fingerless mittens, and a headband. Now, I was immediately drawn to the headband because of its really, really cute style. It's very feminine with this little picot edging, and I just love the twist. The twist is so nice. But what I love the most about this headband is that it is double layered. This is twice as much yarn. This is twice as much fabric as you would normally get in a knitted headband. And that's one of the little small details that I love about this pattern and what I love about Laura's designs in general. She does things that I don't necessarily think about to do, but once I see that they're in pattern, it makes so much sense and it's so useful. For example, this double layer. It keeps your ears really, really warm. And I live in Canada. It gets really, really cold. I need to have very warm accessories, and this is amazing. So I know you're probably all thinking, I just showed you a twisted headband that I did as my last project of 2021, and my first project of 2022 is also a twisted headband. But I'll tell you why those are kind of back to back. I had been wanting to make this headband for a while, and I really wanted to make it out of that purple yarn once I found it. If you haven't watched my last video, it was Spun Right Round DK. I think it's in the color Lights Out. Anyway, it's a very, very vibrant purple. I'll put a picture here, so you can see what it looks like. It's absolutely beautiful. And I thought I had enough left to do Laura's headband, and I got part of the way through. I don't even think I was halfway, and I realized I was going to run out of yarn well before I had enough done. So that was sad. I couldn't do this pattern, so I came up with my own sort of deal instead. And like I mentioned, that one's a little too small. It's also a little too narrow, so it doesn't cover my ears completely. So I went digging through my stash again. Over the holidays, I did a very deep review of my stash yarn, and I found a lot of things that I just couldn't see myself using. So I decided to try and sell some and donate some. And when I was going through the stash again, I found some yarn that I've had for a long time. It's probably one of the oldest yarns in my stash. Consequently, it's also the very first hand-dyed yarn that I ever bought. So I started knitting, it will have been 7 years ago, around this time of year, because I remember joining Ravelry about halfway through January. If I go onto my Ravelry, it tells me when I created my account, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when I started knitting. I could have started just before that, or I could have started just after that. I'm not entirely sure. It was later on in that year, so that would have been 2015. I went to my first ever trunk show, and before that I didn't even know what a trunk show was. It was one of the ladies in my knit group at the time who invited us to go there, and she introduced me to hand-dyed yarn and trunk shows, and I met Samantha of Ravenswood Fibre Co, which is a local yarn company here in Nova Scotia. I absolutely love her yarns. I will definitely link her page below. And Samantha was showing off some of her hand-dyed yarns, and I was immediately drawn to this one. I still have some of it left, so I can show you what it looks like caked up. It is the color Snickerdoodled, which is one of her oldest colors. She definitely doesn't do this one anymore, but I was immediately drawn to it because it looks like a mussel shell that you would find when you're beachcombing. So if you don't live near a beach or you haven't come across a mussel shell, the inside of the shell is usually this really pearlescent white color. It's very shiny. It's very attractive when you are looking along the sand and you see something sparkling. And then the other side of it is usually a mix of purple and like dark blue and a bit of gray. So it really had all the colors of a mussel shell. So that's what drew me to it at first, because it just really stood out to me, even though it is mostly a light pale cream color. Those little pops of purple and pops of dark blue, and there's even little pops of orange, they just really stood out to me. So I bought it. I had no idea what I was going to make with it, which kind of was a trend of most of my early yarn purchases. What am I going to do with this? I have no idea. When I very first started knitting, I only bought yarn from Michael's because I thought that was all there was. I didn't even know about local yarn stores or knit picks or anything like that. I had no knowledge of them. And when I first started, I only bought yarn for a project at a time. And then I started stockpiling. What am I going to buy for the next project? What am I going to buy for the next project? And when I was introduced to indie dyed yarn, hand dyed yarn, it was no longer, what am I going to make with this? It was, oh my gosh, that's so pretty. I need that. I need to have that. So that was actually how I got into hand dyed yarn. I am still a huge lover of hand dyed yarn. Love supporting crafters and artisans, that type of thing. And I do still love my basics as well. This is my Evening in the Village turtleneck, which I showed off in my last video. But it's made with bigger company yarns, not indie dyed yarn. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, and the love affair is going strong. So I made Laura's school run headband with this yarn. I absolutely love the pattern. It is a super quick knit. It is a super simple to follow pattern. Laura writes great directions. And one of my favorite things about it, it's size inclusive, which you don't necessarily think about when it comes to accessories, but it is really, really important. This pattern has 6 sizes from baby up to adult. So there's baby, toddler, child, and then adult 1, 2, and 3. And I think it's super important that there are more than one size for accessories, especially ones that fit your head, because everybody has a different sized head. I know Laura talked in one of her videos about when she was test knitting hats or designing hats, she would start off with one size thinking it was going to fit one of her children, and it didn't, so it would fit the other child, even though, you know, gauge was right and size said one thing. So she had a problem of something being too small for one child. I have that problem all the time as an adult because for whatever reason, I have a big head. I did have to measure it for this pattern. I think my head is about 22 inches around, which feels big. I know it's not the biggest size that there is out there for heads, but it can be kind of tricky to get a pattern to fit properly for my head. So that's why I tend to do adult men's hat patterns rather than like women's ones. Or I'll do like the adult large size because a lot of the time things are just too tight and they don't fit. It's annoying. But that's what I loved about Laura's pattern. She had all these different sizes. So I knit the adult medium for myself, and as you saw earlier and show now, it fits really comfortably. So there's still, you know, a bit of give. It's not squashing my head, and it's also not slipping off. It fits perfectly. The only thing that I will say I don't love about it, and it's not Laura's fault, it's just the way that things are designed. I find that the seam of the twist kind of digs into my head a bit, but that is just the nature of this pattern. It could also have been my yarn choices. That could just make it feel a little rougher. I know when Laura made the pattern, it's designed using two strands, a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair held together, which would be a bit of a thinner, softer yarn, but I wanted to use just a plain DK weight, one strand, which is what those two strands equal out to. So I don't love that that kind of digs in a bit, but it can't be helped if I want the beautiful twist in the front. The only other thing I will mention about this is that I despise seaming with a passion. So I found a way to do this headband without any seaming. Because you start at one end, you go all the way to the other end, and then you have to sew those two ends together all the way along here. I was not gonna do that. I love you, Laura, but I wasn't gonna seam that much. So I just did a provisional cast on, and then I did a 3-needle bind off to connect my two ends. And it works perfectly. It's completely seamless because I did it inside out so that the little spine of the 3-needle bind off would be on the inside. And I learned how to do that doing shoulder construction for different tops that I've made before. So I knew it would work, and it did, and it's perfect. So I now have my headband that I'll probably wear all winter long. And I got to use up some stash yarn that I've had forever, literally forever. But anyway, I was really excited to use this yarn for the first time. Really excited to finally take it out of the shadows of the drawers and the bins and give it life as a project. Because I was talking to one of the people that I sold some yarn to, and I mentioned that I think it's really sad when yarn never gets the chance to be knitted up as something. Although I do have yarns in my stash that no idea what they're going to be, so they're going to stay yarn for a long time. But eventually I will knit them into something, because I think that's when yarn really comes to life, is when it gets to be knitted up as something. So I love that this project tells a story of basically my journey starting knitting and my journey getting into hand-dyed yarn. And it's also really, really cute. So, will I make this pattern again? You bet your bottom dollar I will. I actually make accessory patterns over and over again all the time. I don't do it a lot with garments because I find that I've made that one thing, it's good. I don't need it in another color, I don't need it in another yarn. But I feel very differently about accessories because you can always wear a different accessory. It's just as easy to knit one up because they don't take very long. This took me 2 days, and I'm a slow knitter. We had a snowstorm on the weekend, and I just didn't feel like working on my projects that I already had going, so I thought, hey, why don't I cast on something new? And I thought about this pattern, and this yarn was staring at me, saying, use me. So I finally did. Yeah, so there's going to be more of these in my wardrobe. These are also excellent Christmas gift ideas. So if you want to start your Christmas gift knitting early, snap up this pattern. And also take a look at the other School Run collection items because they're really, really cute. So that is my review of the School Run headband by Laura Penrose of Penrose Knits. And now for my book review of the episode. For those of you who aren't fantasy fans, you'll be happy to know I don't have a fantasy book this time. I have a nonfiction book. I still love fantasy. It's my absolute favorite genre. There will definitely be more fantasy books in future episodes, but for right now, I'm reading nonfiction. And I'm reading a memoir called Memoirs of a Cape Breton Doctor. And for those of you who don't know, Cape Breton is part of Nova Scotia, my home province, where I still currently live. And Cape Breton is an island off of the northwestern section of Nova Scotia. It's a really beautiful place, but it can also be quite rugged. There's a lot of it that's still very woodsy, very remote. In the winter, they get pelted by a lot of snow. They get really high winds. It's just a very beautiful but rugged place. So I was really excited to pick up this book I picked it up in a used bookstore that Doyle and I went to down in the South Shore, and I was really excited about it because I didn't know that there was a book that talked about what it was like to be a rural doctor in Cape Breton. As I mentioned in my second podcast episode, I really love reading memoir type or story type nonfiction that is about normal people who are leading extraordinary lives. So at the time I was reading a book called Maiden Voyages, which is about the women who worked on the large ships that crossed the Atlantic Ocean. And this book is sort of the same style, where it's just a normal person who led a really interesting life. It is about a doctor named Dr. C. Lamont McMillan. He opened his practice in Bedeque in Cape Breton in 1928, and he was a doctor there for several decades. He wrote the book in 1975, so it was quite later into his life. But I thought it would be really interesting because, first of all, it's about part of the province where I live. It's set in the 20th century, and it's about a doctor who tried to serve his patients as best he could during times of very difficult travel, especially in the winter. I thought it would be similar to Call the Midwife, which is an excellent memoir. Actually, it's 3 memoirs written by Jennifer Worth, who was a nurse starting in Poplar in London in the 1950s. And obviously a lot of people know about it because of the show Call the Midwife, which was inspired by her memoirs. So I thought this would be a similar type of read. It's good, but it's not that same level for me. I think what I don't like about it is that it's quite repetitive. I think by now every single chapter and every single story has involved something to do with trying to get to a patient during a snowstorm. And he seems to run into the same problems. He seems to have the same issues. So it's a little repetitive. I would have liked if it was, more about the patients and about the bonds that he creates with his patients, with the people in his area. But it's more about like his struggles to get to the patients versus his stories about the patients. So I was actually talking with my best friend who is an editor, and we were talking about how memoir style books that are written by women, for us personally, we think they're better because women are better at telling emotional stories. They're better at, talking about what really matters to the reader. So human interest style stories. And both of us agreed that we prefer ones that are written by women because they tend to have more heart to them. They tend to have more of an emotional pull, and you get more invested in them. And I think that's what the problem is. He wrote it more as like a documentation of what it was like to be a doctor during that time in that place, which nothing wrong with that. It's just not appealing to me as much as I thought it would, but it is a really interesting read. So I do recommend this book. About halfway through. I'm assuming the rest of it's going to be similar to how it is now, but it's just really nice evening reading when we're winding down before bed. I read a chapter at a time, that type of thing. So I'm not, dying to read the next chapter, but it is still an interesting read and I'm quite liking it. So that is it for this quick little episode. It probably won't be quick by the time I get everything put in together. I talked for a long time. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my very first podcast episode reviewing an accessory. And if you like this, please let me know. And if you prefer to just see me review garments, also please let me know. I would like to know what you're interested in watching. So anyway, that is it. You can find me on Instagram as Knitted by Whitney. And if you feel like it, you enjoy my videos, please like and subscribe. And also leave me a comment below. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope you are getting lots of knitting done starting off 2022. I guess there's nothing else to say except everyone take care. Bye.